Si quieres ver el mismo vídeo en español, algo po polsku, or in other languages, mira la descripción abajo. Namaste. Today we'll talk about the journey of a fruit and its names. We'll start with a question. What do the Dutch national soccer team, Laotian Buddhist monks, and prisoners in the United States have in common? To get to the answer to this question, we'll start with a story about an old enemy of sailors.
Release the Kraken!
We will talk about scurvy. Scurvy is a deadly disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. Its symptoms are very unpleasant. Fatigue, dry mouth, tooth loss, fever, and then comes death. Scurvy was already known in ancient times. For thousands of years, many travelers have suffered from it, but it only became a true nightmare in the era of great discoveries, when European maritime powers began long sailing voyages. It is estimated that between the year 1500 and the year 1800, scurvy killed 2 million sailors. Traveling in those days was not so cool. Ferdinand Magellan, during his trip around the world in 1520, lost more than half of his crew to scurvy. For the next 300 years, many nations pondered on how to cure and prevent this disease. At the end of the 18th century, a 56-day-long expedition showed that cures for scurvy were found. And one of these cures was the protagonist of this video, the orange. And thus sailors began to survive long journeys, and since then they have lived happily ever after. Now I can answer the question from the beginning of the video. Dutch soccer team, Laotian Buddhist monks, and American prisoners share the orange color of their clothes. Now our protagonist, the word orange, ended up in English thanks to the French, from the French pomme d'orange. Today in French, pomme means simply apple, and an apple from the ground, that is pomme de terre, means simply potato. But the orange was not originally a French fruit. The French borrowed the word from the Occitan language, which today is almost extinct. The latter, in turn, borrowed this word from Old Italian, in which the orange was called melarancia. But again, orange did not originate in Italy. Let's go back to the times when Europe was shrouded in the darkness of the Middle Ages and the Arabs were experiencing their golden age, the age of conquests, art, and influence. In the 9th century, Muslims from North Africa founded a state in Sicily. It was from this state that the Arabic name naranj got into the Italian languages. Similarly, orange made its way into the Spanish and Portuguese languages as naranja and laranja. Okay, we do owe oranges to Muslims, but the orange was not originally the fruit of Maghreb or the Arabian Peninsula. Before Arab influence reached Europe, during its great conquests, Muslims encountered Persia. They eventually incorporated Persia into their empire. The Persian language has become a prestigious language, not the first and not the last time in history, from which Arabic borrowed many words. The word Muslims lent to the Spanish and Italians was a slightly distorted Persian word narang. Most European languages, including English and Persian, come from the same language, the Proto-Indo-European, that we talked about in one of the previous videos. We are cousins of the Persians, but the word orange came to us indirectly through Arab intermediaries. The Arabic language has completely different roots. It belongs to the subfamily of Semitic languages, languages whose grammar is very different from the grammar of the Indo-European languages that we know, such as Spanish, English, Persian, Sanskrit, and others. But going back to Persia, orange was not originally a Persian fruit. Orange entered the Persian language through the ancient Sanskrit language. Sanskrit is the Indian equivalent of Latin. Today, for example, the relationship between Hindi, which is the largest language in India, and Sanskrit is the same as the relationship between French and Latin. But Sanskrit speakers were not the first to eat oranges.
We need to go deeper.
It turns out that the Sanskrit word naranga comes from a Dravidian language. The Dravidian languages are the original languages of India. When the first Proto-Indo-European settlers arrived in India, that territory already had its inhabitants. These were the people who spoke the Dravidian languages. Today in India, these languages are spoken by no more than 20% of the population. It was from the Dravidian languages that Sanskrit borrowed the word naranga. Today, for example, in Tamil, a descendant of Dravidian languages that Sanskrit had contact with, the word narantam means fragrance. Anyway, the word that English speakers use today has roots in some language from southern India, from a few thousand years ago. Here ends our trace of the English word orange. But that does not mean that the orange was cultivated for the first time by the speakers of Dravidian languages.
Are we there yet? No!
The first mention of the word orange comes from Chinese literature from 314 BCE, but still, it is unknown who cultivated the first orange, although it is believed it happened somewhere in Southeast Asia. Okay, but this is not the end of the complicated history of the word orange, at least in this direction. Now we are going to talk about the country with a lot of sun. The name Portugal derives from the Latin portus cale, where portus means simply a port, and cale. Well, there are tons of complex theories on the origin of the word cale. Anyway, the word orange, thanks to the Arabs, and then thanks to the Spanish, Italians, French, and others, spread through Europe with many similar names. Orange, orange, melarancia, pomarancha, laranja, naranja. But in some languages it received quite a different name. In the Venetian language, orange was given the name Portogallo. The Venetians did not know how to name this fruit, and therefore they simply used the name of the country whose orange production was considerable. If you think this is strange, think why we call this Brazil nut instead of inventing a better word. Anyway, Venice during the late Middle Ages became a power in the Mediterranean basin. For some time, it even owned a part of Greece, to whom they lent the word for orange. But nothing lasts forever. Venice finally lost her position to the Ottoman Empire. The loss of control of the Greek port of Thessaloniki is considered the beginning of the fall of Venice. The Ottoman Turks seized this Greek city, and with it, they borrowed the word portokali. Today, orange in Turkish is portakal. The Turks passed the word on to the Persians. Meanwhile, in Persia, the word narang, which our English orange comes from, began to change its meaning. Today, in Persia, that is, in Iran, narangi means mandarin, and orange is portugal. Twisted are the paths of history. This is how English speakers today call orange with a word that derives from India, and Iranians call orange with a word derived from Latin.
Who would have thought? Not me.
This shows us the cultural exchanges that took place in Eurasia even before the great geographical discoveries. And I'm not only talking about Indo-European languages such as English, French, Persian, or Sanskrit, but also about representatives of other big families such as the Semitic, Turkic, and Dravidian languages. They also participated in the Eurasian voyages of the word orange, and many other words. However, with some parts of the world, European languages have had much less contact for a long time. We'll talk about these regions and their respective languages at another time. If you like the story of the word orange, I recommend you my video on the genealogy of languages. Below there are also links and videos related to language learning and languages in general. For today, that's it. I encourage you to subscribe and see you soon.